Yeah, so we used, or I used a data extraction and program called RevMan, Review Manager, which is a Cochrane kind of in-house program which is available for Mac and for PC. So that was very helpful for data extraction in that it guided me through it very well and it made all the graphs and stuff, so I just had to fill it in. And it comes with a very didactic manual, so that was a relief. In terms of study selection, I guess having in advance worked out the exact question that I wanted to ask, then I could get a very long list and trim it down to a long list and then a short list. And it was really a kind of iterative process of going through studies once, twice, 3 or 4 times to narrow it down to the final dozen studies that we came up with in the end.
Luckily, and as what many of you will see in this module as well, I had access to a very good data extraction database. You can use your own as well, but they're quite hard to make. And the one that I was provided with and the one that you can use in this module really does almost write a systematic review for you. So the data's there to extract, you can just put it into the table and it will convert it into the right sort of data you need. So whether you're comparing 2 different studies and one looks at mean averages with standard deviation, another looks at medians with interquartile ranges, all the formulas are there to make them comparable, and therefore it made it all quite straightforward to do. I think it was quite a lot of work. I had about, I think my big systematic review had about 20 or 30 papers in the final cut, so there's quite a lot of extraction to do, but it was quite straightforward as well.
Now this is an interesting one, particularly for the term respiratory depression in inverted commas, because if you look through all the papers that have been published on this, there have been probably over 25 definitions of respiratory depression. Some people use low respiratory rate, some people use a drop in SATs, other people say, if an intervention is required. So for this paper that we are currently doing, we actually came up with a bespoke definition of respiratory depression to reduce the heterogeneity among the studies. So I think it's important to bear this in mind, and if there's a great heterogeneity among the different studies, then systematic review may be a better option than meta-analysis, because with meta-analysis, if you're not comparing like for like, then that can actually tarnish your results and reduce the validity of your findings.
So this is quite a difficult part of the systematic review process, but it's fundamentally important to the systematic review process. It's normally done by 2 people, so you begin by searching the literature and you end up with several thousand, often tens of thousands of studies to screen. And although that sounds quite daunting, actually, after a little while, you get into your stride and you can get through those studies reasonably quickly. You then have to whittle those down into studies that meet your inclusion criteria, and that's again done by 2 authors. And ultimately, you then do a full paper review and decide which ones you want to include. So it is quite can be a little bit onerous because it's a large volume of work to do, but it's ultimately that's the nuts and bolts of systematic review, is identifying the studies from the literature.
It was a very tough experience, actually. Like I said earlier, from the beginning, the early on in the meta-analysis that I've done, the mistakes was at the start of, which was data collection. So study selection, it was okay. Again, I underestimated it. I thought it was general search engines and then collecting the data, or collecting the studies that we required to analyze. But I didn't really talk to a lot of people with experiences in this. Took it on board myself to do all this work, and it's a fair amount of work. Looking back, if I did chat to other experienced authors, I would have realized that I had a lot of backup and support in study selection. For instance, talking to another colleague of mine that did a meta-analysis later on, he told me that actually the library in UCL had librarians that could run search methodology, much more better than I could, because obviously they've been doing this for all the UCL projects. So spending hours myself doing it, learning how to do a search through the 4 or 5 different search engines, really could have saved so much time for myself and done much more professionally. As well as that, I didn't realize that we needed to save our searches the way we do it. So again, later on in the manuscript, I had to go back and do all that work again, save everything, and I could have saved the hassle of doing all that if I just sat down, chatted to experienced people. So that was the study selection. For data extraction, again, a lot of thought needs to be put into it. Sit down, chat to other people, get opinions from your co-authors before you actually start extracting data. Because at the end of the day, all the studies, and we only had about 14 studies for our manuscript, everyone runs their study in a different way. So you can't really extract data very quickly, very easily, because when you read every paper, trying to extract what your outcomes are, it's presented in all different ways, whether it is drug conversions or different drugs being used, different doses being used, and even endpoints for their data collection, different intervals for your outcomes. So all of that needs to be thought out beforehand, and that's what I found very tricky, and I had to go back again over and over again, not just at the beginning of data collection, even right at the end when we were redrafting our manuscript, to go back and double check things again that way, because it was done very quickly without much thought